The lobby of the National Valor Museum gleamed under soft halogen lights, polished floors reflecting rows of solemn banners and bronze plaques. Families moved slowly, some whispering reverently, others pointing to exhibits with quiet awe. At the far end stood a sign, Korean War Remembrance Wing, honoring the forgotten victory. Through the entrance came the low hum of an electric motor. Major Thomas Yamada, 89, maneuvered his power chair forward with deliberate calm. His tailored navy jacket bore a combat infantryman badge, a Bronze Star ribbon, and a small service pin near his heart. On his lap, a folded news clipping peeked from his coat pocket, yellowed edges, headline barely visible, Heroism at Heartbreak Ridge. Beside him padded Cooper, a yellow Labrador in a navy vest marked Service Animal, Medical Support. The dog moved in perfect sync, scanning ahead without distraction. "Hold it," barked a uniformed guard near the entrance to the wing. He stepped forward, palm raised. Yamada slowed. "Yes?" The guard pointed at Cooper. "No dogs allowed in the exhibit. You'll have to leave the animal outside." Cooper sat without a sound, his gaze locked forward. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Yamada replied evenly. "He's my medical support animal. Federal ADA guidelines." The guard's voice sharpened. "Policy's clear. No exceptions. Not even for old war stories." A hush fell over the nearby visitors. A child clutched their parent's sleeve. An elderly couple turned. Yamada blinked slowly. "Son, this animal is essential. He's not here for show." The guard folded his arms. "Then you can't enter. Rules are rules." Yamada gripped his armrest, muscles taut beneath trembling hands. Cooper leaned in closer. The major didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. But the insult had landed. Thomas Yamada did not respond immediately. He studied the guard with a steady, unreadable gaze, one he had learned long ago in places where being noticed could mean punishment, or worse. Cooper sat beside him, tail still, eyes forward, ready. "I'm going to have to ask you to remove the dog or leave," the guard repeated. His voice had risen slightly, drawing attention. A few nearby visitors slowed their steps. One couple turned to watch. Thomas shifted in his chair. "This isn't a pet," he said evenly. "He's a federally protected medical support animal. I don't care what the vest says. No animals allowed. Period." The words hit harder than the volume. They carried something colder. "He's here for my safety," Thomas said. "I'm partially paralyzed. He detects seizures, retrieves medication, helps with mobility." The guard stepped forward. "Rules are rules. You'll have to come back without him." A pause. Then, "You people always think the rules don't apply to you." Gasps flared from the growing crowd. Thomas inhaled slowly. "My father heard those words, too. Through barbed wire." The guard blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" 1942, Tule Lake. "We were held there for being Japanese American. I was 7. The museum lobby softened around him, voices fading behind a curtain of memory. Dust stung his eyes. Barracks creaked in the wind. His mother folded paper cranes while hiding a cough. His father stood rigid in front of a military officer holding a clipboard. The loyalty questionnaire. The shame in his voice when he said, yes, just to try to prove he was American enough. Thomas had enlisted at 17, not out of blind patriotism, but to fight for a country that once caged his family. He served with the 7th Infantry Division in Korea. Heartbreak Ridge. Snow, fire, and bodies in ditches. He'd pulled Private Reyes out under sniper fire. Bled through his boots carrying Corporal Deeks. Took shrapnel in the shoulder. Lost 2 men whose names still whispered to him in dreams. The Bronze Star came later. So did the limp. And the tinnitus. Back in the present, Thomas looked at the guard. I didn't come here to argue. I came to see a photograph. My unit at Wachon. It's in your exhibit. More murmurs from the crowd. The guard crossed his arms. Not my problem. A woman slipped away unnoticed. Cooper shifted, sensing tension. Thomas steadied his breath. Then a voice cut through the air, is there an issue here? A tall man with silver hair and a ramrod posture stepped into view. Though in civilian clothes, everything about him said military. The guard stiffened. General Monroe, I was just. The man raised a hand. That's Major Thomas Yamada, correct? Thomas looked up. Yes, sir. I remember reading your citation, Monroe said. You held a flank at Wachon under direct fire. You were decorated for bravery. That was you? Thomas gave a quiet nod. Monroe turned to the guard. This man is a combat veteran. That dog is a medical necessity. This entire museum exists to honor men like him. And you've just dishonored it. The guard shrank. Monroe reached into his jacket and withdrew a museum badge. Major Yamada, may I accompany you inside? Thomas took the badge with a steady hand. Cooper stood. The crowd parted. They entered the exhibit together. The air inside the Korean War Remembrance Wing felt different, cooler, stiller. The lighting was softer here, designed to cast gentle shadows across black and white photos, maps etched in brass, and display cases lined with combat gear and handwritten letters. Major Yamada's wheels moved slowly across the polished floor as General Monroe walked beside him in silence, Cooper gliding faithfully at his left flank. Other visitors hung back, sensing the moment wasn't theirs. A few followed at a distance, curious now not just about the exhibits, but about the quiet man who had somehow changed the rhythm of the museum just by standing firm. The hallway opened into a long corridor titled The Forgotten War, Courage Without Applause. Along one wall stretched a panoramic photo of Heartbreak Ridge. Snow-covered hills crisscrossed with craters, foxholes, and the faint silhouettes of men barely visible amid fog and smoke. Thomas stopped in front of a smaller frame beneath it, a group photo, faded and torn slightly at the corner. 10 soldiers huddled together in the trench, half smiling, rifles laid at their sides. A caption read, 7th Infantry Division, 31st Regiment, Wachon Sector, April 1951. That's the one, Thomas said, his voice just above a whisper. That's the last time all of us were together. Monroe leaned in. You're in the back row. Thomas nodded. That's Private Reyes next to me. Kid from San Antonio. Barely spoke a word his first week. By the end, he was singing mariachi songs between mortar shells. He never came home. His finger hovered near the frame. Sergeant Brooks, on the far right, taught me how to tie a pressure bandage using my rifle strap. He died 2 days after this was taken. He paused. That's Nakamura there. Seattle boy. Joined the same month I did. His uncle died in Manzanar, a heart attack during his second year inside the camp. We thought that couldn't happen again. We were wrong. Monroe didn't interrupt. Cooper sat down beside the wheelchair and laid his chin gently on Thomas's shoe. I was just a PFC then, Thomas said. No rank worth remembering. But somehow, I was the last one left in that foxhole after the shelling stopped. My left side was already numb. I couldn't even hold my weapon properly, but I dragged 3 of them back. Couldn't get to Reyes in time. He was still singing when the second mortar hit. A long silence stretched between them. Monroe finally said, history books don't tell that part. They never do, Thomas replied. Behind them, a small group had gathered, adults, teens, one young boy clutching a museum brochure like a flag. A woman whispered something to her daughter. The girl nodded and stepped forward hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir," she said. Thomas turned slightly. "Would it be okay if I shook your hand?" His expression softened. He extended a trembling hand, and the girl took it with reverence. "Thank you," she said. "Just remember their names," he replied. As she stepped back, the young boy approached too. "Were you scared?" Thomas looked at him carefully. "Yes," he said simply. "But I wasn't alone. That helps." Monroe placed a hand lightly on Thomas's shoulder. "Would you mind if I took a picture of you with the photo?" Thomas hesitated. "Only if we include Cooper. He's earned it." Monroe chuckled. "Of course." He signaled to the curator who had returned, watching quietly from the side. She nodded and raised her phone, capturing an image of a man in a power chair, a service dog with bright eyes, and a piece of history behind them that still pulsed with the memory of snow and fire. The moment passed, and the group began to disperse. Some lingered. Some left in silence. But every one of them looked back at least once. Thomas wheeled further down the corridor, pausing occasionally before medals encased in glass, battlefield maps marked with red thread, and boot prints pressed into imitation snow. At each stop, his eyes traveled farther than the exhibit. They traveled decades. "You ever go back?" Monroe asked. "To Korea?" Thomas shook his head. "No. Thought about it. Even got as far as buying a guidebook once. But something in me couldn't." "I understand." Thomas stared at a combat journal behind glass, mud-stained pages filled with faded pencil. "I used to keep one of those," he said. "Then I stopped writing. Felt like if I put it all down, I might never stop." Monroe nodded. "My men in Nam used to say the same. Silence was a kind of armor." A group of middle school students passed by, giggling at first until they noticed the presence of the two veterans. Their teacher hushed them quickly and bowed slightly in acknowledgement. "Funny," Thomas mused. "Most days, I feel invisible. Today, I feel remembered." "You are," Monroe said. "You always were. The rest of the country's just late to the realization." They reached the final exhibit in the wing, Letters Never Delivered. It featured unsent correspondence recovered from the battlefield, some mud-caked, some half-burned. One was addressed to Mama but never finished. Another read, "If you're reading this, I didn't make it." Thomas stared at the display for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice cracked slightly. "My mother never got a letter from me during the war. I didn't want her to worry. After my second wound, I stopped writing altogether." "You ever tell her?" "Bits and pieces. She passed before I could say the worst of it. I don't think she needed to hear it. She already knew." Monroe placed a hand over his heart, silent. A few steps away, Cooper shifted. He gently licked Thomas's hand once, a reminder. Thomas smiled faintly. He always knows when the ghosts come too close. They turned to leave, but Monroe stopped beside a placard near the exit. It read, "They gave more than time. They gave memory, family, limbs, breath. This wing stands not to glorify war, but to ensure those who served in silence are never forgotten again." Monroe said softly, "You belong here more than most." "I used to think I didn't," Thomas replied. "Used to think the uniform didn't fit me the way it fit others. Took me a long time to realize, maybe it was never supposed to. Maybe I had to wear it my way. Your way was the right way." A beat passed. Then Monroe added, "That guard won't be working the front desk again. I made sure of it." Thomas didn't react with satisfaction. Only quiet understanding. "It's not about punishing him," he said. "It's about what kind of place this is when no one's watching." Monroe gave a slight nod. "And what kind of country we are when someone stands quietly and refuses to move." Thomas looked back one last time at the wall of photos. Sometimes, he said, just being here is the victory. They exited the Korean War wing with slow dignity, the hush still following them like a second shadow. Monroe said little, allowing Major Yamada the space to process what had just happened, the recognition long deferred and the ghosts long carried. Cooper remained close, brushing Thomas's hand now and then with quiet intent. The museum's central atrium loomed ahead, where a memorial sculpture rose like a flame, an abstract shape of folded steel, engraved with quotes from veterans across wars. Some visitors had returned to their tour groups, but several still lingered, unsure whether to approach again or leave the moment undisturbed. Monroe cleared his throat. "Would you like to sit by the fountain for a while?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. My legs are beginning to hum." They made their way to a quiet alcove lined with commemorative benches. Thomas eased his chair beside one, and Cooper curled down at his feet. "You know," Monroe said, "you've done more today than you realize." "I didn't come to make noise," Thomas replied. "I came for a picture, a memory. You gave everyone here something bigger. A reminder." Thomas leaned back. "Reminders fade." "Not always," Monroe said. "Some sink deep. You stood your ground. Dignity has gravity." A small group of students passed by. One boy pointed toward Thomas and whispered. His teacher hushed him, then walked over gently. "Sir, would it be all right if we asked you one question?" Thomas nodded. The teacher turned to the students. "Go ahead." A girl with wide eyes asked, "Did you have to kill people?" Silence fell again. Thomas looked down at Cooper, then at the group. "War is made of moments you never wanted," he said. "Yes, I did. But I never stopped seeing them as people. That's what kept me human." The students listened quietly. "Did it make you sad?" another asked. "Yes," he said. "Still does. That's why I remember. So I don't forget the cost." The teacher thanked him. As they left, the young boy whispered, "I want to be like you." Thomas gave a small, weary smile. "Then be kind. That's where it starts." After the group moved on, Monroe said, "You give those kids more than any exhibit." I just answered honestly. "That's rare," Monroe said. "And necessary." A museum staff member approached discreetly. "General Monroe, Major Yamada, the board would like to formally acknowledge what happened earlier. We're preparing a statement. Would you both be willing to say a few words?" Thomas frowned. "I'm not looking for attention." "It's not for attention," Monroe replied. "It's for truth. If you're willing." After a pause, Thomas nodded. "Then let me say it in my words." Later that afternoon, the crowd gathered in the atrium. Thomas rolled forward slowly, Cooper at his side, Monroe nearby. A museum official gave brief remarks, apologizing for the earlier incident and reaffirming the museum's mission. Then he introduced Major Thomas Yamada. The room stilled as Thomas took his place at the podium. "I didn't come here today to make a speech," he began, his voice low but steady. "I came for remembrance. I wanted to see a picture of friends who never got the chance to grow old." He looked out at the visitors. "I was told once that rules make places orderly, but respect makes them sacred. This museum isn't just walls and plaques. It's a promise. A promise that those who served won't be forgotten, and that those who sacrificed will be honored, no matter how long it takes." He rested a hand on Cooper's head. "This dog has saved my life more times than I can count. He didn't wear a uniform, but he stands with me as surely as any brother in arms. He reminds me I'm still here. And that being here, sometimes, is enough." Applause began, slowly at first. Then louder. Sustained. Thomas nodded once. Then turned, and rolled back into the quiet. The next morning, the photo of Major Thomas Yamada standing before the Heartbreak Ridge display, with Cooper at his side, circulated online. It wasn't posted by the museum, but by a young visitor who had quietly filmed the last moments of the ceremony, captioning it simply, "This is what real dignity looks like." Within hours, it had tens of thousands of views. Veterans groups reshared it. Korean War historians tagged his name. And in every comment thread, someone asked the same thing, why don't we know more about him? But Thomas didn't read any of it. He spent the morning sitting in the courtyard of the veterans' home he now lived in, Cooper lying beneath the iron bench in the shade. A folded copy of the museum's formal apology sat unopened on his lap. Across from him sat a fellow resident, Robert "Bobby" Choi, a Vietnam vet with sharp eyes and a faded bandana tied around his thinning hair. "They really gonna fire that guard?" Bobby asked. "I didn't ask for that," Thomas replied. "I asked to be let in." Still. About damn time someone called out one of them punks for pushing people around. Bobby spat into the grass. Some folks don't get it till they see someone smaller stand taller. Thomas didn't respond immediately. He was watching a pair of crows squabble near the tree line. "I'm not sure I stood taller. I just didn't move." Bobby laughed dryly. "Same thing, brother." A nurse stepped outside and handed Thomas a small envelope. "This came to the desk this morning. Mailed overnight. No return address." Thomas opened it slowly. Inside was a yellowing photograph, another angle of the same Heartbreak Ridge group shot. But this one had writing on the back. "To Tommy, you made it home. I'm glad one of us did. Reyes." Thomas stared at the note, breath slowing. The paper trembled slightly in his fingers. "I thought this was lost." "Maybe it was," Bobby said. "Maybe it came back when it was ready." Cooper nudged Thomas's knee. He tucked the photo carefully into his breast pocket, above the Bronze Star ribbon. Later that day, a call came from the museum. The curator who had slipped away during the confrontation, the same one who had arranged for Monroe to intervene, wanted to know if Thomas would consider contributing to a new temporary exhibit, Service and Silence, Unseen Sacrifices. It would focus on veterans whose struggles didn't end with the battlefield. Those who had returned home to suspicion, silence, and barriers. Thomas considered it for a long while. He agreed, on one condition. "I want to include a section about Cooper. Not as a novelty. As a partner." The museum agreed. That evening, Monroe arrived at the veterans' home. "I've got something to show you," he said, placing a folder in Thomas's lap. Inside were several drafts of an exhibit placard. One bore the heading, "The Stand in the Hallway." "That's not bad," Thomas said. "Little dramatic." "It happened," Monroe replied. "And it meant something." The final version featured a composite image, Thomas and Cooper in the exhibit, the original foxhole photo, and a quote beneath. "Sometimes it's not about changing the world, just standing your ground long enough for others to see what's right." Cooper's vest would be placed in the display beside it when he retired. Monroe hesitated, then asked, "Would you consider saying something on opening day?" Thomas shook his head. "I've said enough. Let the photo speak." But privately, he began writing something. The morning of the exhibit's opening came 2 weeks later. Dozens arrived, more than the museum expected, fellow veterans, students, families, journalists. The photo had grown into a story. The story into a symbol. Thomas did not sit near the front. He remained outside for most of it, letting others speak. Letting others discover the story without the burden of his presence. Then a child wandered into the courtyard, having slipped away from her parents. She stopped in front of Cooper and asked, "Is he the one in the picture?" Thomas smiled. "He is." She looked at the dog with awe. "He's a hero." "He keeps me alive," Thomas said. That's pretty close. Did he fight in the war? No. But sometimes, the hardest wars come after. And he's been with me for those. She nodded as if understanding something far older than her years. That evening, as the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Monroe found Thomas seated alone at the foxhole display. The dog rested with his head on the floor, ears twitching at the sound of distant footsteps. They're talking about making it permanent, Monroe said. The exhibit? Yeah. Too many people saw themselves in it. Thomas nodded. He pulled from his coat a single folded sheet, the speech he never gave, and handed it to Monroe. You read it, he said. Monroe took it and unfolded the paper slowly. He read silently, then aloud. You don't know what someone carries by looking at them. You don't see the ghosts, the wounds that don't bleed, the battles still being fought behind the eyes. But you can choose to listen, to step aside when someone says, "This is what I need to survive." That's not weakness. That's what strength looks like when it stops roaring. He folded the paper carefully. You sure you don't want your name on that quote? Monroe asked. Let it be anonymous, Thomas replied. Sometimes silence says enough. The museum emptied. The lights dimmed. Cooper lifted his head. I think, Thomas said slowly, it's time I go home. Monroe placed a hand on his shoulder. You are home. The exhibit became more than a temporary display. Within 3 months, service and silence had drawn over 100,000 visitors. It wasn't the museum's most lavish or artifact-filled wing, but it was the one people lingered in longest. Letters came in daily, pinned to the wall beside the Heartbreak Ridge photo. Veterans left behind dog tags, challenge coins, and folded notes. One woman wrote, "My grandfather never spoke of Korea. Today, I understood why. Thank you." Thomas returned only once more that season. He didn't go inside. Instead, he sat beneath the oak tree in the memorial garden outside the museum, Cooper stretched out beside him, both watching visitors come and go. He didn't need to see the display again, he carried it inside him. And in a way, he knew others were carrying it now too. He looked down at Cooper. You're tired lately, he said aloud. I can see it. Fewer trots. More limps. Cooper wagged his tail once, as if to say, still here. Still with you. Thomas smiled faintly. You've done more than enough. Later that week, his physician confirmed what he already suspected. Cooper was nearing retirement age for a working service dog. His joints were stiff, reflexes slower. The vet was kind but clear, time was coming. Another 6 months of work, maybe, she said. But he's earned a rest. There are younger dogs ready to be trained for this level of care. Thomas ran a hand through Cooper's fur, quiet. There aren't younger dogs who know me like he does. The vet nodded. Still. You may want to think about your next companion now. Transitions take time. Time. It had always felt like a luxury. Over the next weeks, Thomas took shorter trips, skipped events he would have once forced himself to attend. He began writing more. Not just speeches, but small journal entries, memories. Stories. Moments. He didn't always finish them. That wasn't the point. One morning, Monroe visited the veteran's home with a surprise. A young woman stood beside him, military posture with civilian warmth. She held a leash, and at the end was a golden retriever pup, alert and wagging, already in training. This is Maple, Monroe said. 6 months into a veteran support program. She's got the instincts. They said she might be ready for transition training in a few months. Thomas regarded the pup. Maple stared back and tilted her head. She's beautiful, he said. But I'm not sure I'm ready to say goodbye to Cooper. You wouldn't be, Monroe said. None of us ever are. That's not what this is. This is about giving Cooper his rest, and giving you a future. Cooper approached Maple with curiosity. She licked his muzzle once and sat beside him. Something passed between them, understanding. Thomas exhaled slowly. Let's try a few walks. See how she listens. Over the next few weeks, Thomas walked the grounds with Maple beside him and Cooper slightly behind, no longer guiding, just accompanying. Visitors often paused to greet them. Some recognized the older dog immediately. A teenager asked, "Is that the dog from the museum?" "He is," Thomas said. "Is she his replacement?" "No," Thomas said. "She's his legacy." Maple proved quick and responsive. She nudged him when he paused too long. Learned to sit when he steadied himself. Cooper watched, tail gently thumping, as if giving his blessing. Then one morning, Cooper didn't rise with the sun. He lifted his head, licked Thomas's hand, and laid back down again, his breathing shallow, slow. Thomas sat with him all day. He spoke softly, stories from the foxhole, from the exhibit, from yesterday's walk. Maple rested nearby, silent. That evening, Cooper passed with his head in Thomas's lap. The veterans' home held a quiet memorial. No uniforms. No trumpet. Just a gathering under the oak tree where Cooper used to lie, watching people pass. The museum added a small bronze plaque to the service and silence exhibit, beneath Cooper's vest and a photograph of him beside the wheelchair. It read, "Cooper, guardian, partner, friend." He walked beside the man who carried others. And when the war was long over, he still stood watch. After that, Thomas walked with Maple. Not as often. Not as far. But enough to feel the ground beneath him, to breathe air unburdened by barbed wire or hospital corridors or crowded lobbies. One afternoon, he sat once more in the garden outside the museum. A man approached, tall, in his 30s, wearing a faded 25th Infantry Division cap. "Are you Major Yamada?" Thomas nodded. "I wanted to thank you. My father served in Korea. Never talked about it. We saw the exhibit last month. First time I saw him cry in public. Told me about losing his squad. About how he thought no one remembered. That day changed him." Thomas looked at the man's eyes and saw echoes, old sorrow passed down like heirlooms. "Thank you," the man repeated. Thomas smiled. "Just remember their names." As the man walked away, Maple shifted closer. Thomas rested a hand on her head, eyes distant. Later, Monroe joined him at the bench. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Quiet's not bad," Thomas replied. "It means the world's not asking you to explain yourself." Monroe smiled. "I heard a rumor. They're considering renaming the Korean War Wing." Thomas arched a brow. "To what?" "The Yamada Wing. Not just for you. For what you stood for." Thomas was still. "I didn't fight to have my name on a wall." "No," Monroe said. "You fought to make sure others didn't vanish from them." The two men sat together beneath the late sun, the branches casting long shadows over the garden. A breeze stirred. Somewhere in the museum, visitors paused before a photograph, one of 10 soldiers, half smiling, unaware of what tomorrow would bring. And outside, one of them was still standing watch. Still standing.